Mar-a-Lago. Now, before he left, he spoke to reporters, and he was asked directly, this is after he was sort of challenging the FBI again, questioning it, but he was asked directly whether or not he would pardon Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, who has pled guilty and is cooperating with the FBI. Listen to his answer.
Would you consider a pardon for Michael Flynn? I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens. Let's see. I can say this. When you look at what's gone on with the FBI and with the Justice Department, people are very, very angry. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
You know, that's part of the theme from President Trump railing against the FBI. Let's go back and take a look at some of the things he said, Craig. This is a tweet from December 3rd. This is President Trump after years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more, running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters. Worst in history, exclamation point. But fear not, we will bring it back to greatness. That may have been part of what he was doing when he was visiting that training academy down there in Quantico, where some of the FBI trains. The class he was visiting today is more local and state law enforcement. Another tweet for you. This one's back in November before the election. Excuse me, it wasn't before the election. The Tucker Carlson opening statement about our once cherished and great FBI is so sad to watch. James Comey's leadership was a disaster. Craig, it seems to me that the President of the United States, he came back here, it's snowing here in Washington, flew back on Marine One, but he seemed to be very much in campaign mode down there. We'll see whether or not that shifts back into more presidential, less campaign rhetoric from the president. Craig?
All right. Hans Nichols there at 1600 Pennsylvania. Garrett Hake, do stand by for me, sir, if you can, there at Capitol Hill. I want to bring in McKay Coppins, staff writer at The Atlantic, David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, and David Ignatius, columnist at The Washington Post, who is also an MSNBC contributor. Mr. Coppins, let me start with you, sir. For a lot of folks, this all seems to be an effort to undercut Americans' faith in the Mueller investigation.
Look at all his disguises.
I think that it's fair to say that it's having an effect with his base, which probably is where this is primarily aimed. Trump has his rallying cries against kind of the FBI, the Justice Department, the intelligence community in general, have picked up.
It's just a face put on there, man. It's not even really a person.
Watch
they put his face
talk radio.
It's CGI. They put his face on it. Look, what?
You hear constant talk about how there's a conspiracy to take down Trump, that there's rampant corruption and bias in the FBI, and I think that
his face is right here.
Very little throughout his presidency to bring along anyone besides his base, so that might be enough to keep him in power.
David, this is your column in the Post today.
Second disguise.
The Russia facts are hiding in plain sight. You end your column.
Who's behind the mask?
The next time Trump demands a probe of Mueller's investigation or the FBI's handling of Clinton emails.
He's pounding
Remember,
the table.
He isn't arguing the facts or the law about collusion with Russia.
Demands
probe. The table, and it's a point worth noting.
Table.
Here's something else, David, that continues to strike me: the fact that the president continues to try and convince large swaths of America that the FBI is filled with card-carrying liberals, and that it seems to be working. That he seems to be convincing people that the FBI is just this bastion of liberalism.
We'll see how many people he's convincing with this. The Alabama result suggests that the
you can't tell that's a disguise. Open your eyes, people. Come on.
Base, kind of Steve Bannon.
Look at the evil in his eyes. If you walk in Jesus, you can see it.
One thing I'll tell you is that these comments are quite upsetting to FBI officers. This is an agency that prides itself on being outside politics. And every time Trump makes a very political comment, attacks the FBI, says it's in tatters, people working there, working as hard as they can in often dangerous investigations, are upset. The new FBI director, Chris Wray, said last week very specifically that That's not the agency that he is leading. This is Trump's own appointee, mind you. So I think we'll see how broadly it plays. Certainly the conservative media is picking it up. Some members of Congress, whether the country as a whole is buying into this, I'm not so sure.
David Jolly, you know, the chief evidence that the president's supporters keep pointing to are these texts between an FBI agent and an attorney, former DOJ lawyer, in which they reportedly criticized President Trump. It's also noteworthy that, you know, they criticized Bernie Sanders, they criticized Hillary Clinton as well, even Chelsea Clinton. Is there anything to these texts, David?
No, because, listen, that suggests that a professional law enforcement officer can't check their own political opinions at the doorway of their place of employment. That would suggest at the same time, then, that no member of Congress could objectively approach an issue because they have proclaimed their political interests before entering office. It really is an attack on the integrity of these law enforcement officers.
It's a hologram.
It's very disconcerting, and I agree with David and McKay. This is something that on the right is growing, particularly in conservative media. It's easy for us to think it is isolated just to Trump's base, but here's the problem, Craig. The problem is this. Every single one of those Republican members of Congress and Republican senators still need the votes of that base to get reelected, right? They can't just get reelected on the non-Trump Republicans.
Right.
And so the disconcerting thing is that they will begin to give aid and comfort to this argument for their own political reelections, just like we saw them embrace Donald Trump, even though many of them opposed him initially.
That's an excellent point. Guys, do stand by for me just a second. I want to bring in Garrett Haake now. There's been some developments on the tax bill. Republicans, we understand, hoping to unveil their final version later this afternoon, just a few hours. First, however, they've got to win over a few senators, each with their own issues. What's the latest on Senator Marco Rubio out of Florida, Garrett?
So Marco Rubio was asking for a more generous child tax credit. He wanted it to be significantly more generous, and he got, it sounds like, most of what he wanted. The negotiators ended up adding a couple of $100s of refundability to this child care tax credit into this bill. Rubio's office is being very coy about whether or not this will be good enough for him. I guess I should be careful at how I describe this, but everyone I'm talking to on the Hill and in Rubio's orbit believe that this will be enough to get him to vote yes, although they are being very careful to not come out and say that he is a yes. So there is optimism here on the Hill. I think you heard this morning from the president, optimism from him, and optimism from folks who know Rubio in different political circles that this will be enough to get him on board. Now, this change is one of a number of changes that have been made in this conference committee process to smooth out some of the details in this bill and get something that gives a lot of these holdout senators a little bit of what they want and helps them continue to afford to actually pass it. So, for example, the big red line on the corporate tax rate, which had been set at 20% in every